The news flashes across your screen. A child battling illness you can't comprehend. A family losing everything they've ever worked for in a sudden, brutal disaster. A good person you know, betrayed and ruined by someone corrupt. We see it, and a voice inside whispers, "That's not fair." We are wired for justice. But what happens when the unthinkable strikes someone who absolutely doesn't deserve it, and the heavens feel deafeningly silent? This isn't just a philosophical puzzle. It's the brutal reality faced by a man named Job. To truly grasp Job's journey, we need to understand the crisis it confronts, the crisis within biblical wisdom literature. Think of it as three friends grappling with the very structure of reality. First, there's Proverbs. Proverbs promises a world built like a perfectly balanced scale. Do good, get good. Do evil, get evil. Simple, fair. You get what you deserve. But then you meet Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes looks out at the world and sighs with weary honesty. It's not that simple, he says. Sometimes the scales are wildly, inexplicably tipped. Life isn't always fair. Things happen senselessly, randomly. It's like trying to grasp smoke. Beautiful, but impossible to hold. Impossible to control. Impossible to comprehend. And this collision, the promise of Proverbs shattered by the reality of Ecclesiastes, leaves us with a raw, aching question. If life isn't always fair, if chaos exists, if the righteous suffer, then is God truly wise and just? That's the uncomfortable truth hidden in plain sight. And it's that tension, that agonizing paradox, that the book of Job bravely steps into. Job's story begins not on earth, but in a place described like a heavenly court, a celestial command center where cosmic forces gather. God is present, surrounded by angelic beings reporting for duty. God points out Job, his servant on earth, describing him in the highest terms: blameless, upright, fearing God, shunning evil. A man whose righteousness is beyond question. But then one figure approaches, distinct and challenging. He's referred to by a title, the Satan. In the original Hebrew, ha-Satan, literally meaning the adversary or the opposer. Not a name, but the title describing his role in that moment. Out of the entire heavenly host, he is the one who dares to question God's perspective, God's governance, God's understanding of humanity. And he locks his gaze onto Job, God's chosen example. The Satan proposes a chilling, audacious theory. Job's devotion is a sham. It's not genuine love for God, it's a bribe. Job is only righteous because God has built a hedge around him, a shield of protection and blessings. Does Job fear God for nothing? The Satan sneers, his voice dripping with cynicism. Take away his blessings, and he will surely curse you to your face. He believes Job is merely working the system, his piety a transaction for prosperity. This is one of the most debated and perplexing moments in all of Scripture. God doesn't strike the Satan down. He doesn't argue. In a decision that has puzzled believers for millennia, understood by some as a necessary test of genuine faith, or perhaps tied to the complexities of free will in the cosmos, or a test with cosmic stakes far beyond Job alone, God agreed. Not out of indifference, but seemingly for reasons tied to a deeper cosmic reality that only he fully grasped. Very well, God says, his voice resonating with complex, perhaps even sorrowful wisdom. Everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself. Do not lay a finger. The stage is set for a test of unimaginable severity. Why would God allow this? Why permit his blameless servant to be targeted by the adversary in such a way? This unanswered question hangs heavy in the air, immediately pulling us into the heart of Job's mystery and our own questions about suffering. Unaware of the cosmic wager, Job's world collapses with shocking, brutal speed. Messenger after messenger arrives, each delivering news more devastating than the last, like hammer blows. His oxen and donkeys stolen, servants killed. Fire from heaven consumes his immense flocks. Raiders steal his camels. And then, the final, gut-wrenching blow. A mighty wind destroys the house where all 10 of his children were feasting. They are all gone. In a single horrific day, Job loses everything. His immense wealth, the security of his future, the sheer joy and life represented by his entire family. Imagine the silence that follows the last messenger speaks. The chilling emptiness where laughter used to echo. The profound shock. He deserved none of it. And it was all stripped away in an instant. What would you do? Scream until your voices roar? Collapse in utter, hopeless despair? Job's response is nothing short of astonishing. In a moment that defies human expectation, in the face of utter ruin, his first act was not despair, but worship. It was an astonishing act of faith. In the face of this cataclysm, he tears his robe, shaves his head. Ancient, powerful symbols of absolute grief, and falls to the ground, not in anger, but in worship. Through his tears, his brokenness, his incomprehensible pain, he utters words that defy logic, words that have echoed through centuries as a testament to radical faith. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. In all this, the text explicitly states, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. Can you truly fathom that level of faith? A faith that acknowledges God's absolute sovereignty, his right to give and take away. Even when the loss is so devastating, it feels like the end of the world. But this is only the beginning of his test. How would you react if your worldview collapsed? The Satan isn't finished. Back in the heavenly court, Job hasn't cursed God. The wager isn't settled. The challenge escalates, targeting Job's very body. Skin for skin. A man will give all he has for his own life, strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face. Again, God permits the test, but with a single, crucial boundary. He is in your hands, but you must spare his life. The Satan strikes Job with horrible, agonizing sores, covering him from head to foot. Imagine the unending, searing pain. A man once revered, now covered in festering wounds, sitting in ashes, using a piece of broken pottery to scrape his skin. A futile search for even a moment's relief. But the agony is multi-layered. In that society, such affliction was seen as undeniable proof of grievous sin. Job becomes utterly isolated, a pariah. People cross the street to avoid him. He's mocked even by children. And then, in a moment of profound, shared brokenness, his wife, having lost her children and her life alongside him, looks at his suffering and cries out, "Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die." It's a desperate plea, perhaps not just an attack, but a cry of shared anguish from someone who cannot bear to witness any more pain, urging him to end the suffering even at the cost of his faith. news of Job's plight reaches three of his closest friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. They come from distant lands, their intention to mourn and comfort him. When they first see him from afar, his appearance is so utterly changed, so horrific, they can barely recognize him. Their shock and grief are genuine. They tear their robes, sprinkle dust on their heads, ancient, heartfelt expressions of shared devastation. And then, in one of the most powerful displays of empathy in the entire Bible, they sit down on the ground with him, and for 7 days and 7 nights, they do not speak a single word. A sacred silence that acknowledges the depth of pain words cannot touch. They simply sit with him in the ashes, sharing his space of suffering. But the silence, sacred as it was, cannot hold back the tide of their theology. Job finally breaks the stillness, unleashing a raw, agonizing curse on a day he was born, wishing he had never existed. And the friends, trapped in that rigid Proverbs-like equation that suffering must equal sin, can hold back no longer. One by one, they speak, their complex Hebrew poetry delivering a consistent, crushing message. Job, you must have sinned. God is just. The world is ordered. Therefore, your suffering must be your fault. They offer platitudes that feel like accusations. Eliphaz, for instance, speaks of a vision, stating that the innocent do not perish, implying Job's suffering is proof of his guilt. Job 4:12-21. They are convinced their rigid theology is the answer, and they relentlessly try to force Job into confessing sins he didn't commit, not necessarily out of malice, but because they need to preserve their own understanding of a predictable, just universe, even if it means invalidating Job's genuine pain and righteousness. Imagine Job's pain being compounded by the judgment of those who came to comfort him. They become, as he later cries out, worthless physicians offering remedies that don't heal, but only deepen the wound. For 34 agonizing chapters, the debate rages, the friends unwavering in their dogma, and Job fiercely defending his blamelessness. He knows he hasn't sinned in a way that deserves this. God himself testified to his righteousness. But Job isn't just debating, he's on a brutal, violent, emotional roller coaster. One moment, a flash of defiant faith against the darkness. I know that my Redeemer lives. Even after my skin is destroyed, in my flesh I will see God. A powerful, almost defiant assertion of hope in ultimate vindication. The next moment, plunged into the depths of doubt and anger, lashing out at God himself, daring to accuse the Almighty of being unjust, reckless, even an enemy. He cannot reconcile his horrific reality with the God he thought he knew. He cries out, not for comfort, but demanding that God appear and explain this unimaginable injustice. And then finally, in the book's breathtaking climax, God answers. He appears not with a simple explanation, but from the heart of a whirlwind, a powerful, awe-inspiring storm cloud. Job gets his wish, a direct, unmediated encounter with the Almighty. But God doesn't reveal the heavenly wager. He doesn't tell Job why he suffered. Instead, he silences Job by taking him on a breathtaking, overwhelming cosmic tour. He bombards Job with questions about the creation of the universe, the limits of the oceans, the mysteries of weather, the intricate instincts of wild animals. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades? Do you give the horse its strength? God unveils a reality so vast, so complex, it dwarfs Job's suffering. The overwhelming point: God is revealing the incomprehensible scale and intricate complexity of managing the entire cosmos. He's showing Job that his wisdom operates on a level so vast, so multifaceted, that Job's limited human frame of reference for justice or fairness is simply inadequate to judge it. He even points to magnificent, terrifying creatures like Behemoth and Leviathan. Powerful, chaotic forces, ancient symbols of chaos and raw power, yet declared by God to be part of his good creation, a truth that shatters simple human notions of good and evil based on our comfort or understanding. God isn't giving the answer to suffering, but showing Job the scale and complexity of the question is beyond human comprehension. His wisdom isn't simple. It encompasses realities we can barely imagine. God's awe-inspiring speeches conclude, leaving Job humbled, his questions silenced by awe. He never receives the answer to why he suffered. Yet, overwhelmed by the revelation of God's power and wisdom, Job responds, "I am unworthy. I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes." His demand for understanding dissolves into profound reverence and trust. The book then shifts back to prose, and here's another moment that defies expectation. God restores to Job double everything he lost. But if suffering wasn't simply punishment, then getting everything back isn't simply a transactional reward for passing a test. It defies the logic of the friend's merit-based system and the Satan's transactional wager. It is, as many understand it, a profound demonstration of God's grace, a gift unearned, undeserved, flowing from his character rather than Job's performance or suffering. It reinforces the book's core message: God's ways are not our ways. This restoration, an act of inexplicable grace, and that's the challenging, profound lesson of Job, the culmination of the wisdom literature journey. Proverbs gives us the rule. Ecclesiastes shows us the painful, confusing exceptions, and Job calls us to radical trust. A trust in God's character, even when the rule doesn't seem to apply, even when life is bewilderingly unfair. And the why remains shrouded in mystery. What if finding peace in suffering isn't about getting answers, but about trusting that God's perspective is infinitely vast, his wisdom working in complexities you cannot possibly grasp? What if your suffering, inexplicable as it is seen, known, and held within the purposes of a God whose character is ultimately good, even when his ways are mysterious? Job never learned why he suffered, but he learned to trust the who. The God who is sovereign over both the light and the darkness, over prosperity and pain. He found faith, not in clarity, but in the unwavering character of an infinitely wise God, sovereign over both the light and the darkness. The book of Job is a masterpiece that invites you to wrestle with life's hardest questions. Find faith, not in easy answers, but in trusting the God of infinite wisdom. Like this video, share your wrestling and your thoughts below, and subscribe to continue your journey through biblical wisdom.